Hello there. I'm a daily reviewing 1998's The X-Files. Today's movie is the offspring of one of the most popular television series of the 1990s, The X-Files. The initial TV series ran between the years of 1993 to 2002. It then had a 6-episode miniseries in 2016 and a shortened 10-episode season in 2018. The movie came out between Season 5 and Season 6 of the original run, and had the unenviable job of how do we appeal to people who are familiar with the TV show and yet make it accessible to those who aren't. The show's creator, Chris Carter, had originally wanted to end the series after the 5th season and continue with a series of movies every couple of years. The idea being that they could tell bigger stories and avoid burnout from the weekly grind. 20th Century Fox preferred to keep it on as a TV series because of the huge ratings it was bringing in at the time. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the TV show, it was about an FBI agent by the name of Fox Mulder who is obsessed with UFOs and paranormal events that make up a number of unsolved cases by the FBI. These cases are designated the X-Files. He is partnered with a forensic pathologist by the name of Dana Scully, and she is there to try and give a reasonable scientific explanation for some of his crazier findings in his investigations. So he was the believer and she was the skeptic. The show came in 2 flavors, Monster of the Week and UFO conspiracy theories. This movie straddles the fence. It is filled with UFO conspiracy, but the aliens are quite monstery. So, do you need to have seen the first 5 seasons to appreciate the movie? No, although it wouldn't hurt. Having background on people or events always helps to add layers to the characters or the events. But upon re-watching the movie, and it has been at least 5 years since I've watched any of the series, and I have to admit, my familiarity with the lore is as rusty as can be, and yet it was easy enough to follow along with what is going on. As a one-off movie experience, however, it might be a little disappointing because it ends with a there's more to follow type of ending. So, what's it all about? The X-Files begins in earnest with a child accidentally falling into a cavern buried beneath a field in their suburban Dallas neighborhood. He is exposed to what is known as the black oil, and we see streaks of it under his skin heading up to his face, and then his eyes go black. The kid's friends, who are looking down through the hole in the ground, freak out and go and get help. Soon, several fire trucks arrive, and the firemen drop a ladder down into the hole and climb down to rescue the kid. They go silent, and the fire chief sends down another pair of firemen to check on the first pair. While that is going on, a helicopter lands nearby, and a hazmat crew exits with an isolation container. They are quickly followed by a man who walks up to assess the situation. The hazmat team exits the hole with the boy in the isolation container and heads back to the helicopter, which then takes off. Then, multiple trucks show up as the existing first responders look on in shock. The man then whips out a phone and we learn his name, Braunschweig, and he lets his superiors know that the fit has hit the shan. And this is where we first encounter my biggest problem with the movie. The feds arrive not but 5 minutes after the locals.
Oh, how convenient!
Indeed. How convenient. You're going to see a number of convenient things happen in this movie in order to keep the story moving along. Next up, we cut to a federal building in Dallas a week later. It is crawling with FBI agents, and we quickly learn they are all investigating a bomb threat to the building. The agent in charge looks across the way to the building across the plaza, and he sees someone on the roof. We then cut to one of our 2 co-protagonists, Dana Scully. She's the figure that was seen on the roof of the other building, and she is on the phone with our co-protagonist, Fox Mulder. They have some playful banter, and Scully finally asks why they are in the wrong building. Mulder said he was playing a hunch, but then they decide that they're wasting their time and go back into the building to get a drink on this hot day. While Scully is waiting in the lobby, Mulder goes into a room where the vending machines are, and he quickly discovers that one of the vending machines is actually the bomb, and it's set to explode in 14 minutes. Worse still, the door locked behind Mulder when he entered, and now he is stuck. Scully sounds the alarm, and they start evacuating the building, while the feds race from the other building to this one. By the time they cut through the door to free Mulder, there's less than 5 minutes left on the timer. The agent in charge orders everyone else out while he will stay behind and disarm the bomb. So everyone leaves, and the agent in charge just sits there and he watches the clock count down, making no attempt to disarm it. Now, when this movie came out in 1998, the Oklahoma City bombing was still plenty fresh in the minds of the viewers, as it had happened only 3 short years earlier. So extremist elements being able to blow up a federal building certainly wasn't out of the realm of possibility. I also think the scene serves Carter's intention of showing the X-Files on a grander scale. As it is, we will find out why this happened story-wise in a bit. But first, Mulder and Scully are back in D.C. before an FBI board of inquiry. A bomb has gone off, killing 5 people and destroying a very expensive building. Now I can hear you ask, 5 people died? I thought they were evacuating the building.
Special agent in charge, Darius Michaud, who was trying to defuse the bomb. 3 firemen from Dallas and a young boy.
Ah, very interesting. Where have we seen several firemen and a boy in Dallas recently? Of course, none of this is known to our protagonists yet. They have more pressing matters, as a bomb went off even though the FBI were present. This doesn't really put the Bureau in a good light. And quite frankly, they weren't exactly covering themselves in glory back then. And so the Bureau needs some scapegoats, and since Mulder and Scully found the bomb, it must somehow be their fault. This is the kind of idiocy I've come to expect from the U.S. government. Afterwards, at a bar, Mulder is getting drunk because the powers that be decided to shut down the X-Files. While relieving himself in the alleyway behind the bar, he encounters one Dr. Alvin Kurzweil. Kurzweil identifies himself as a friend of Mulder's father, who worked with him in the State Department back in the day. And he tells Mulder that the agent in charge didn't try to disarm the bomb, and the 4 others were already dead when the bomb went off. Mulder, ever the believer, is skeptical. And who can blame him?
Darius Michaud was a 22-year veteran of the Bureau.
Michaud was a patriot. The people he was loyal to know their way around Dallas. They blew that building to hide something.
A patriot? That's our explanation? There was no other way to deal with the bodies of the firemen or the boy without blowing up a building and a well-regarded senior FBI agent? Why was this even needed to be done since these bodies were already in the possession of our shadowy government forces? This just seems a bit excessive and stupid way to get Mulder and Scully involved. And then there's Dr. Kurzweil. How does he have this information? By his own admission, he is no longer part of the government, and yet here he is to set off the investigation proper.
Oh, how convenient!
Mulder tells Kurzweil it's all bunk and he leaves, but reconsiders and has a cabbie take him to Scully's apartment. There he talks her into one last investigation. Cut back to Texas. We see a pair of dark helicopters land at the quarantine site in the Dallas suburb. A couple of suits get out and we see the lead solitary figure light up a cigarette under the prop wash of the helicopters. Those who watch the show already know who he is. For the uninitiated, he's called the cigarette smoking man. He goes to one of the quarantine huts and he meets with Braunschweiger to see what he has found out. Braunschweiger takes him down into the hall and shows him the body of one of the firemen. Which begs the question, weren't all the infected firemen taken to be destroyed in the explosion of the building? But Braunschweiger says this is one of the firemen. So did they have decoy bodies in the explosion? Braunschweiger shows that the body has turned somewhat gelatinous and an alien body can be seen gestating inside. The cigarette smoking man says to test the vaccine on it and if it doesn't work, to burn it. Cut back to Bethesda, Maryland. Mulder and Scully have gone to the Bethesda Naval Hospital. They are here to examine the body of one of the dead firemen. Now why the body was shipped to the East Coast is beyond me. And more to the point, how does Mulder know it's here? We saw the entire conversation with Kurzweil, and he didn't say anything about a body being here. Not only that, we just saw that there was one of the firemen back at the Dallas quarantine site. Why wouldn't you keep them together? I mean, quarantine. How does it work? We've seen the orders given, test the vaccine and destroy the bodies if it doesn't. Instead, we have a spare body in Bethesda for Mulder and Scully to stumble across.
Oh, how convenient!
So they go down to the morgue and they discover that the fireman did not die in a bomb blast because his body is intact. However, his tissues are turning into gelatinous goo. They move the body out of the freezer and take it to an autopsy room for Scully to examine. Mulder then leaves Scully to examine the body while he goes to Kurzweil's apartment to get some answers. There he finds the local police ransacking the apartment looking for child porn. As Mulder leaves, he sees Kurzweil hiding in the nearby alley. They talk and Kurzweil says that it's all a scam to silence and discredit him and that somebody knows that he has talked to Mulder. He tells Mulder that he and Mulder's father work together studying a virus that will destroy the world if it gets loose and that the virus is going to be released by the aliens. Worse still, there's no vaccine for the virus. He tells Mulder to go to Dallas and to dig further into this investigation. Of course, my question is, how does Kurzweil know any of this? He cut ties with these shadowy deep states years ago by his own admission. Mulder calls Scully, and she tells him that the body she is examining has signs of massive infection. Mulder tells her he wants to go back to Dallas to look more closely into this case. Later that day, Mulder is in an FBI field office in Dallas to see if they have any more evidence of the bodies found in the explosion. The agent says that he sent the bodies they had to Bethesda, which explains how they got there, but not why our shadowy forces allowed them to be out of their possession in the first place. The only evidence this office has left are some fossils from the FEMA lab, but they weren't related to the fireman or the boy. Scully takes a look at them under a microscope and she sees evidence similar to the infection she discovered with the fireman she examined. Mulder gets the agent to tell them where the fossils were originally discovered, and they are off. Cut to the cigarette-smoking man. He calls a rather posh-looking British man, who is referred to as the well-manicured man, to inform him that the heads of the shadow government are meeting in London tonight to discuss some important matters. Later, at that meeting, we learn that the alien virus has mutated and can now create a new type of gray alien. The well-manicured man is not thrilled with this news. He says that it looks like the aliens they are in league with are going to start colonization, and they're going to use all humans as food source, including them. The others want to play for more time, to see if the vaccine works. They also say that Mulder is on the case, and that could mean bad news for them. The cigarette-smoking man then says that one of the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Mulder saw one of the infected bodies that we destroyed in Dallas.
If the body was destroyed, just how did Mulder see it? They say that they believe that Kurzweil has been talking with Mulder, and that they both need to be handled. The well-manicured man says that killing Mulder will just inspire others to pick up Mulder's banner. They then say that Mulder might be controlled by going after something that Mulder cares about. Cut back to Dallas. It turns out that the fossils discovered were from the Dallas suburb that our shadow forces had quarantined. But now they are gone and a brand new playground is there. Several kids show up and spill the beans to Mulder and Scully that the cleanup crews had only left about an hour ago and point our intrepid heroes in the right direction. So, just what are the odds that they will catch up to and find the tanker trucks that have been on the road for an hour? Better yet, we have a fork in the road and Mulder wants to go in one direction and Scully the other. Mulder splits the difference and heads forward onto a dirt road, which eventually comes to a dead end.
Missed it by that much.
Scully isn't happy. She needs to be back in D.C. for another hearing, which will determine her future with the FBI in the next 11 hours. When suddenly...
No way!
They follow the train to a cornfield in the middle of the desert. There are 2 domes in the middle of the field. They make their way into one of the domes and soon discover that they hold a large swarm of bees. They then make it back outside of the dome, only for a pair of black helicopters to chase them around in the cornfields for a bit. But then the helicopters disappear. Mulder and Scully then make it back to their car and leave. The next day, Scully arrives a bit late for her hearing. She presents the fossils she collected from the Dallas Bureau and lays out some of what she and Mulder have discovered in Texas. Meanwhile, Mulder goes to the bar to find Kurzweil and lets him know what he has found out so far. Kurzweil is thrilled to hear this, and Mulder is put off because he thought Kurzweil had all the answers. Kurzweil responds,
Yeah, well, I don't have them all.
He then becomes afraid that Mulder was allowed to get away from the test site in order to lead our shadow forces back to him, and so he leaves. Mulder thinks he might be a little too paranoid, but then he hears a man up on the fire escape overhead. Mulder then goes back to his apartment, where Scully shows up and tells him that she has been reassigned to Salt Lake City. She isn't interested in working for the Bureau outside of the X-Files, so she has tendered her resignation. Mulder begs her to stay, and they have some character moments together. They are about to kiss when Scully is stung by a bee that was hidden away in her clothes. Scully starts to go into anaphylaxis, and Mulder calls for an ambulance. The crew gets over there toot sweet and loads Scully up. As Mulder is trying to find out which hospital they're going to take her to, this happens. Man, that's what I call a strict no family members in the ambulance policy. Luckily for Mulder, another ambulance shows up after the other one leaves. We then see Scully in an isolation pod being loaded onto a cargo plane, and who is there? The cigarette-smoking man. Well, this can't be good.
Evil! Pure and simple!
Mulder wakes up in a hospital with 3 men staring at him. They are not identified in the scene, but they are recurring guests on the TV show known as the Lone Gunmen. They are conspiracy followers that put out a newsletter about conspiracies. Oswald was framed, the moon landing was a fake, that sort of thing. In a stroke of luck, one of them found the dead killer bee in the hallway and collected it. They also know that someone took Scully, but don't know where. Mulder's boss, Assistant Director Skinner, then shows up to check up on Mulder. Mulder wants to leave to find Scully, and Skinner offers to do it in his place. Mulder isn't having it, however, and the lone gunmen offer to help. Mulder has one of them get out of his clothes so he can pretend to be one of the gunmen in order to fool the guard watching his room. As they leave, the guard looks into the room to see Skinner on his phone and the back of the head of the fake Mulder in bed. Later, while prowling through the back alleys of D.C., Kurzweil runs into the well-manicured man. It doesn't end well for him.
Mr. Mulder.
Mulder shows up looking for Kurzweil. The well-manicured man then tells Mulder that he has Scully's location and the means of saving her life. They then take a ride and the well-manicured man lays everything out for Mulder. Admittedly, it's pretty far-fetched. Aliens landed on Earth millions of years ago and evolved into the black oil virus. The black oil can control humans that it comes into contact with and has been waiting for their alien brothers to return to Earth to reconstitute them back into aliens. The well-manicured man belongs to a syndicate that is helping the aliens in the hopes of creating a vaccine that will help protect him from being taken over by the black oil. Now that the virus has mutated and can create new versions of the Greys using human hosts, the well-manicured man has realized that things are looking pretty bleak for humans. He wants Mulder to find Scully and introduce the vaccine into the exposure program the syndicate has set up. Hopefully it will work. He then commits suicide via car bomb in the hopes that it will somehow protect his family. Cut to some time later. Mulder is in Antarctica, heading towards the coordinates that he was given. He runs out of gas just shy of finding the base. But find it he does. So, how to get into a base in the absolute middle of nowhere, undetected. Luckily for him, the crevice he falls into leads to a pipe that leads into the base.
Oh, how convenient!
It turns out that the bulk of this base is underground, and it is huge. Not only that, it is filled with bodies of the infected. In the distance, he sees an isolation pod, and he makes his way down to it. Inside the pod are some clothes and a gold cross necklace, much like the one Scully wears. Mulder immediately starts looking into the cryo chambers nearby. Hey, it's Scully. What are the odds?
Approximately 3,720 to 1!
Mulder breaks open the cryopod Scully is in, and he gives her the vaccine. We see the black oil leave her body via the tube in her mouth, and after it gets out, it shrivels up. The base rocks, and up in the command center of the base, a man tells the cigarette-smoking man that there is a contaminant in the system. The cigarette-smoking man then deduces that Mulder is here, and he has the vaccine. Monitors and equipment start to spark and explode, and the cigarette-smoking man orders everyone to evacuate the base. Mulder gets Scully to the cryopod and mostly dressed, and then they try to hot-foot it out of there as the place is warming up and water and ice is falling all around them. Not only that, the new Greys are awakening. Mulder and Scully make it to the surface. Soon, the ice beneath starts to crumble. They then make a break for it but don't make it in time. Fortunately, the ice was giving way so a flying saucer could rise into the sky. One would be inclined to think that the ice would rise on top of the saucer and slide off of it much like Mulder and Scully did as it reached the surface. Alien physics, I guess. The ship flies off and our heroes are left to try and get back to the real world in a snowcat with no gas. Cut to some time later and Scully is sitting before the Board of Review again. As we listen to the chairwoman telling Scully that her claims are dubious at best, we see the Shadow Forces packing up shop and moving to different climes. The chairwoman says that they're going to drop the investigation into Scully's claims about bees, corn, and black oil until they get some hard evidence. Scully then gives the chairwoman a vial containing the bee that one of the lone gunmen had collected earlier in the hallway to Mulder's apartment. Cut to Tunisia. The syndicate has set up operations in the desert again. The cigarette-smoking man informs Strughold that the X-Files have been reopened. Strughold, for his part, shrugs it off. Their work will continue. The end. At least until Season 6 starts. And there you have it, the X-Files movie. As a fan of the show, I enjoyed the movie when it came out, and I still do. But I have to say, I really see all of the flaws after having revisited it after all these years. And while I initially liked the conspiracy theory aspect of the show, as it went on it became increasingly convoluted and silly. This movie is a roadmap for the future seasons of the show, and so it delves deeply into the grand conspiracy. And I have to say that I prefer the original conspiracy of there are government forces that don't want evidence of aliens to get out to the public at large, and that was all there was to it. Now, the TV show that led into the movie came out in the mid-90s, and at that time, shows were still pretty much episodic television, meaning each episode was self-contained and you didn't need to watch hours upon hours of TV in order to know what was going on. However, most people, at least here in the US, had VCRs and could record their favorite shows, and so we were beginning to see some experiments into long-form storytelling. Long-form storytelling can be quite good, but it isn't without its problems. Carter's initial idea for the X-Files was inspired by the very episodic series Kolchak the Night Stalker. This was a series from the early 1970s in which a reporter for a tabloid newspaper would investigate bizarre deaths that would turn out to be caused by vampires, mummies, and other such creatures. So I don't think that Carter had a long-term conspiracy idea in mind when he came up with the X-Files. I believe that he was sort of forced into it by the powers that be, it's Fox, to keep the show going. And so the movie suffers from having to keep the show going. Also, since they had a very tight schedule in which to get the movie done between seasons, they didn't have a lot of time to tighten up the plot a bit. Hence so many conveniences. Take the well-manicured man's death, for instance. He kills himself because he's betraying the Syndicate by helping Mulder. His betrayal is because of the black oil's mutation, and that has demonstrated that the aliens have no intention of allowing the Syndicate or their families to survive the coming alien apocalypse. But since he killed himself in D.C. and Mulder lives in D.C., isn't he admitting to helping Mulder? What's the thinking here? The Syndicate will look after his family because he died in D.C. and there's no possible way he could have helped Mulder? Really? Of course, there's the possibility that the Syndicate has other enemies in D.C. as well. Let's see. Who was a power player in D.C. in '98? President Clinton? Everyone knows that he was just a skirt-chasing poonhound. When he finished his term, he was done with politics. On the other hand, Senator from New York, later Secretary of State, and a run at president. And then there's the alleged trail of bodies she has left behind. But Hillary up to shady stuff? What are the odds of that? It was directed by Rob Bowman. He's best known for The X-Files, Reign of Fire, Elektra, and Castle. It was written by Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz. Carter is known for The X-Files, Millennium, Harsh Realm, and The Lone Gunman. Spotnitz is known for The X-Files, The Lone Gunman, Night Stalker, and The Man in the High Castle. It starred David Duchovny, Gillian Anderson, Martin Landau, John Neville, William B. Davis, and Jeffrey DeMunn, all of who do a fine job, but some of the scenes between Mulder and Scully are a bit too melodramatic for those not familiar with the show. It was rated PG-13 for some bad language and some violence. It's 2 hours and 1 minute long, and I gotta say, at times you do feel the length. It had a budget of $66 million, and it made $189 million. So even with Hollywood accounting, it did make a profit. IMDb has it at 7 out of 10, Metacritic has it at 60 out of 100, and Rotten Tomatoes has it at 66% per critics and 72% per audience scores. Now, while I do like the movie, this time around all the flaws really stood out to me. As such, I'm going to give it about a 6.5 out of 10. The plot really needed to be worked on more thoroughly to eliminate so many conveniences and ill-thought-out plot devices. The movie is something of a thriller, and yet our big action set piece doesn't really seem to be thought out all that well. As for a recommendation, it is a must for all of those who are fans of the show. But for those unfamiliar with the series, this one probably is not for you. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time.
It's one small step for man.
Now cut that!